point that Josiah was making, well articulated, perhaps a bit painstaking, but but is that you are two individuals,
Right.
and therefore, as a direct result of that, you are incapable of having complete agreement with one another, because the scope of your experience, aka the context, it's just too different. And to have complete agreement, I'm going to wrap this up, I promise. To have complete agreement, it's too lofty a goal.
Right.
It's inconceivable. However, the principle that you're targeting it's beautiful, and it is absolutely transformative in the context of a relationship. Correct. So, welcome to the ENSO podcast. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. The purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. With this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, what are we talking about today?
The soul's curriculum.
The soul's curriculum. That sounds like a fun topic. And here to discuss that with us today, we also have a very special guest, Josh Hunt. What's up, Josh?
What's going on, you guys? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's jump right into it with our very first question. The only time we actually use these questions is in the very beginning of the podcast. And that question is this: what recurring challenges or patterns in your life might be pointing to the specific lessons your soul is here to learn? And I want to lay some groundwork for this question. We're making an assumption here, and this was my choice, not Josiah's, that this is really a hypothesis that we're testing, that we come into this experience, into this existence, with specific lessons that we need to learn, and that each of us has unique lessons that apply to us individually. So we might not all be here to learn the same lessons, but my experience has been that life is definitely trying to teach me something. And there have been many times I can recall, much to my chagrin, that I have avoided learning those lessons. And life, being as crafty and clever as it is, has developed new situations, new scenarios, and new circumstances that have forced me to learn that lesson for real this time. And it usually happens to be a bit more painful the second time around. That's just something that I've picked up on over time. But anyways, I'm curious, what do you guys think? Does anybody have initial thoughts on this that they'd like to weigh into? Josh or Josiah, feel free.
Let the guest go first.
Go ahead.
You sure?
I would. Yes, please.
We could rock, paper, scissors for it.
Yeah.
All right, well, I won. All right. So, so thank you for making that clarification, because that's actually where I started whenever when you sent me the topic, because there is an underlying assumption that, which is really the elephant in the room, that we're here to do anything, that we're here to learn lessons.
Explore that next week.
Yeah, and so I think we've got to question that assumption, and I'm not disputing it. I'm just questioning the general assumption. And that takes courage, right?
Absolutely.
Especially to interject the conjunction if we are here to learn something, what is it that we're here to learn? Right? If we're here to do anything, what are we here to actually do? And I'll get into why that's so important later, but I do want to hear Josh's initial perspective or perception of that.
Yes. Hate to be that guy, but could you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a long question.
It is.
And honestly, this is
for the audience, just to refresh their memory as well.
This is an incredibly deep topic. Yeah. And like I said earlier, it assumes that we are here for a reason and here for a purpose. And I have the benefit of knowing you outside of this room, Josh.
Right.
And I know that you do believe that we are here for a reason and for a purpose. And that those are unique to all of us. So here's the question. What recurring challenges or patterns in your life might be pointing to the specific lessons your soul is here to learn? And just in layman's terms, honestly, if I was going to answer this question, how I would ask it to myself is, what events have occurred multiple times that are forcing me to learn a lesson that I might be resistant to? That's how it's shown up for me.
That is such a deep, heavy question.
It is.
But for me, I would say empathy for people. I think when you kind of like peel back the layers of like people's talents and like what they're really good at, it's usually something along the lines that they also could be really bad at, right? Because fear could drive you to be really good at something, right? Like people who come from nothing, when they make a little something, they're like, I'm never going back, right? So I say that to say, for me, it's always been about people. I think not only is people the number one currency, but like that's something that's always shown up in my life and something that I've always wanted to empower, is to empower others. And when there's opportunities for me to do that, I take those signals now as signs for me to take action on doing that, because times in the past when I haven't, it would show back up in a different light or in a different way or in a different version of that same test. And you're in data. I'm not sure if you're in data, but you take me from a guy I just met in like the first 5 minutes. Someone's in data and understand these. And one thing about data would tell us and history would tell us is that these things are interconnected, right? So you start to see those patterns. So those patterns that show up, I'm like, okay, this is the same pattern. Why is it showing up? And I think when you start to ask yourself why, that's when you begin to get the answers.
I love that response. I appreciate you for sharing it. It makes me think of, so we were talking earlier about pain and how that can sometimes be an indicator that there is a lesson to be learned. And I have begun finding so much peace in when I'm going through a really painful experience in my life, pausing for a second and being like, wait a sec. What is life trying to teach me right now? That I am stubbornly refusing to learn at every turn and making this process harder. Because I think that the learning, it can resemble the flow of a river. It's natural, it's steady, it's stable, it's resilient. And I think that we experience pain when we try to fight against that current. I'm making a lot of assumptions that Josiah's about to have a field day with.
Yeah.
But that when we swim against that current, it's counterproductive, and it's oftentimes painful and discouraging. So there could be a lesson in there about resilience, about perseverance, but I think oftentimes it has more to do with adaptability and flexibility. Where is the current trying to take me right now, and how do I understand that in the context of my life story?
Right.
Because ultimately, I don't know about you guys, but all of my favorite stories, they have some hardships in them. It's not just like they set out to find the treasure and a week later they found it. No obstacles in path. That's, I don't want to read that.
Right.
Right.
So anyways, Josiah, you wanna weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word there is context, right? So, the reason I introduced the conjunction of if is just to make the distinction between, what drives that overall premise of there's a lesson for me here that's put here, there's obstacles here that's put here for me to learn something. Well, not necessarily, because that suggests design, and that may or may not be the case, right? So, and if there is design, then that design operates off of assumptions, right? Which may or may not be the case as well. But what is constant for all of us is context, We're all operating off of some sort of context or within some sort of context, right? So that's what I've observed. And so when we start to question, to your point, by whose context am I operating within? My environments, my own, how do I parse between the two of them, right? So I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do, because when we start to question that context, we also start to question the assumptions. And we question the assumptions, then we actually get to our decisions that are derived from those assumptions. Then we start to look at our decision chain, right, across our life, across the continuum of our life, our existence. And I think that's where I end up, for me at least, or I arrive at one of the key principles, which is, being able to examine my decisions based on those assumptions across that continuum of my life, right? So what is driving me to make some of the decisions, and how are they a part of not only my own patterns, but where I derived that context from and made those assumptions from, right? How do I get out of that cycle if that is the case? So that's kind of like the first principle, parsing, between the context and the assumptions. And I think that ultimately, when you figure that out, then you start to have an impact on your quality of life. I'm not sure if it's positive or negative, because only time can tell how it will end up. But it definitely has an impact on your quality of life, at least for me. And then I think the other principle is, well, you guys cut me off.
Oops.
I can get into the other principle later, but basically, just coming to the realization that if I'm operating within someone else or something else's context, then I can very easily operate within my own and create my own purpose and meaning and determine who I want to become. And ultimately, what if that is the soul's curriculum?
To create your own purpose and meaning?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that creating your own purpose or meaning fracture relationships?
It could. But that's not the only result.
Okay, here's another question. Would you rather live in a society where you can create your own meaning, or live in a society where there's shared meaning and values?
Well, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think we live in a society where that actually occurs.
But which one would you specifically rather live in? And you too, Chase. I would love to hear both of y'all's feedback.
Oh, okay. Well, I would just say I'd rather live in and, not either or. Right? And I say that because it depends on, like I said, the context, right? So depending on the particular situation, the way I look at it is, there was, in the beginning of anything, there's only been one person or entity that wasn't required to be initiated by a group, right? Or by another person. They self-initiated. Is that track so far?
Yeah. But the only reason I just, would love to get an answer if you can pull.
Yeah.
You can get an answer, because I was going to go somewhere with that. So yeah, if you have an answer, it's not like, hey, red car, blue car. No, I'm going to use the green one.
Okay.
That's not there.
Yeah. So I would just say one word, we define our own, define our own meaning and purpose.
Okay. Mr. Chase.
You guys are making me think of back to the days when I was really interested in existentialism and existential philosophy. I'm thinking of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, and how the life is inherently meaningless. However, that's not an excuse to live a meaningless life. And I subscribe to that a little bit. Maybe not fully, but I do believe that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to experiencing meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in life. And I think it's very much a create your own adventure. However, there are so many signs along the way for us. And this is ultimately why I fall more into the design camp, right? Because I don't really believe in coincidence. And I have full knowledge that I could be totally wrong about all of this, and I'm willing to accept those consequences if I am. I think that's part of the deal. But I definitely, those are my beliefs on meaning and purpose, and I was kind of fiddling over here while you were asking the actual question. So if I totally sidestepped it, please forgive me.
You answered that. I think that
good.
yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, why can't we be responsible for designing our own purpose? We do that often.
It begs the question, right? We're dancing around this. Who's running the show here? Not this show. Hello. Who's running the show of our lives? And I don't have an answer to that question, but through deductive reasoning, I have been able to determine it's not me. I'm not running this show. I am influencing this show. And I have tremendous powers of influence. However, I'm a child in terms of knowing how to wield them. I've just scratched the surface in terms of my power to influence the circumstances in my life. And there's a lot of excitement and joy and fulfillment that come from that. But I also don't, my life goal isn't to become the master of the universe. I have no desire to control anything or anyone. My earnest desire in this life is to give as much as I can, is to love as much as I can, because I think that those are the two most effective
Where do you think that came from?
mechanisms for fulfillment.
Right. Where did that desire come from?
I think that is an inherent desire.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is something that I was born with. And it might have been on the last show we were talking about, or maybe just one of our other conversations, we were talking about derived versus inherent desires. And I'm really using Josiah's terminology here. But I find so much value in it because I think derived desire is, I'm gonna make some enemies right here. I think derived desire is like social media.
Oh. Derived?
Or, and really quickly, to define derived desire.
Yeah. So
think of like socially desirable attributes.
Okay.
I think that's an IO jargon term. But basically, America. We live in America, so success. And the enterprising behaviors, the accumulation of wealth, materialism, consumerism, these are, in my opinion, from my perspective, these are derived desires. So we're not born with a desire to amass wealth and fortune. We decide that amassing wealth and fortune is an avenue to, number one, staying safe. We have shelter. We have food. That is also an avenue to community, which is one of our, belonging, excuse me, which is also one of our basic needs, right? So, but I think it sidesteps the deeper understanding. I know I'm going down the rabbit trail here again, like I like to do.
I think he picked the red car.
I picked the red pill, right? Isn't that the one that you like get to do the fun stuff?
Yeah.
I don't want to wake up tomorrow and.
So now that we picked our pills, though, there was something else that you were.
Right.
Oh well, no. I think living in a world with shared values, much like living in or operating in a business with shared values, it just creates more efficacy. Right. You can still have self-agency. But you're able to essentially have marching orders in a direction that leads to fulfillment when you have shared values, right? When you have a society where you can create your own values and own meaning, it can, like I said, fracture relationships as well as, essentially your mother being kidnapped and then brought into a tribe, and then, raped, and then the child from that rape is essentially Genghis Khan. That's what I'm referring to. Like, that's what happened to him, several hundred years ago to his mom, because in China at that time, you could essentially do what you want, taking someone else's wife and children and then making them slaves was not frowned upon. It wasn't a shared value, right? And ironically, that was something that Genghis Khan, before he did all of those crazy things, did with his tribes. He created peace, and he created peace by creating a shared value system. That was one of the first things he did when he amassed power out there in Central Asia. So I think it's important to have some shared values, and to work towards sustaining those. I think it's important because, when we create our own meaning and our own values, it can be detrimental.
Clarifying question.
Yeah,
really
I was just
quick.
going to ask.
Okay, I'm surprised you didn't ask this earlier. I was shocked actually, but the premise here is that deriving our own meaning and purpose has a likelihood of fracturing relationships, and I just want to better understand that. I want to dig into that. Was that what you were after?
Well, no, I was going to ask. Do you think there's a difference between context and values? Are they the same thing?
That's a great question. I don't know how to answer that. I would say that values and context, there is a difference between values and context.
So the example you gave of Genghis Khan's mother,
right?
That was his context,
right?
That wasn't his value,
right?
Right.
But it was the values of the tribes that kidnapped his mother.
Right. So I would say, I agree, values are derived from assumptions made about context. And if we're not
Correct.
parsing and trying to understand the context that's driving the assumptions, we will then assume values that may or may not be applicable to the time we're living in or the environment we're living in. That's why I asked about the difference. That's because I'm not against values, right? I'm talking about context and how our context will drive our values, and then those values then drive our meaning. Because we haven't actually examined the context.
100%. So, for example, ladder of inference, which you're referring to, right? Like observed data, you have that available data there. That's like the context, which then I think leads into selected data. You can select the meaning or select what data you observe, right? And then you have, how you interpret it, which then leads to the assumptions, which then leads to conclusions, beliefs, and then that's your actions, right? So I agree with you there as it relates to the context. However, if we were to say in today's society, if there was not, law and order, and everyone was truly able to create their own meaning and do what they feel, right? Where would society be?
Well, okay, so I guess what I'm asking is, I get what you're saying. Society would probably be in a worse place.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is actually what we're trying to unpack here. I think people don't actually ask about the context that created law and order and how it's actually impacting their lives. Because there are a lot of people that do heinous things in the name of law and order, mainly because they don't understand the context of law and order. And so I think someone creating their own meaning is really just how they interpret, at least the way I'm framing it. Someone interpreting what is, their assumptions about the world, their assumptions about their experience, and saying, you know what, I challenge my assumptions and I'm going to do something differently. Whether or not it is negative or positive for their environment is yet to be determined, right? But I would guarantee there are negative and positive lessons that they learn from evaluating those assumptions, from evaluating that context, and then making different decisions.
Interesting.
And I don't know how that plays out.
Yeah.
If it's all negative, right? If it's all positive,
Right.
if they derive really positive values, right? And they raise their kids to do really good things.
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
Right.
But I think that is a capacity that we all have as human beings,
Yeah.
to really unpack our stuff, what's driving us, and then make different decisions.
Yeah. Being able to think. It's like
Yeah.
one of the best gifts.
I want to resubmit my question that I asked earlier, still with like clarity on this. But I also want to interject with a new thought as
Okay.
I'm listening to these brilliant men talk about these ideas. I'm thinking to myself, what's the technical difference between creating your own meaning and thinking critically? I mean,
There's not much.
if you
There's not
think
much.
critically,
Yeah.
you will derive your own meaning.
You will.
Make sense of the patterns inherent in life. And this is an assumption, or an inference at least. So something to consider, something to think about. But the earlier question was, why is it that deriving our own meaning is likely to fracture relationships from your perspective? Or did I just misinterpret that? Maybe that's not what you're saying at all.
No, that's pretty much what I'm saying. And I just recently watched this documentary that my wife discovered. It was called "What Is a Woman?" I don't know if any of
We
you
need to
guys
watch that.
saw that,
Sounds
but you
good.
should.
Yeah,
you
it sounds
seen
like a highly contextualized piece.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if if you have the chance, probably should check it out.
Will do.
Because this gentleman goes around. I think his name is Matt or Mike Walsh, and he goes around the world asking people, what is a woman? And everyone that he's asked essentially kind of gives different answers. And, in today's society, it was like a polarizing type of question too, right? Like, what is a woman? And, you have these different people giving their different contexts and their different meaning. You got professors, you got psychiatrists, you got just all these experts in these fields, right? Experts. And it was just so funny to me because, we are now living in a society where creating your own meaning is cool. And creating, like science isn't cool anymore, right? Like science, like people are literally just being like, hey, science doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to say that this is, T instead of Topo Chico because I just feel like it. And that's the meaning I want to give it.
Right.
It's like it's Topo Chico, but no, I want it to be T. And just because I said it's T, like that's my meaning. And I identify with this being T.
Right.
You don't have to agree with it. As a matter of fact, you do have to agree with it. And you do have to say that this is T as well, right? And that's kind of like the society that we're living in now. So it is polarizing to have, to kind of disagree with being able to create your own meaning in a sense. But yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that, when you do create your own meaning, it does fracture relationships and can. And one of the things that, one of the very first questions you asked was, what challenges kind of led you to that point. And I would say like love, for me, was love. I tried my hardest to ignore who I loved and what love is because my career is more important. My freedom was more important, right? But I see a ring on your finger. You're married. You're about to get married.
I'm almost there.
You're almost there. He's right there. Shout out to my boy Cheese. About to make somebody a Bryant. To keep the family line going.
With some nice hardware too.
With some nice hardware. Shout out to Wayne Pops.
She's keeping her name.
She's keeping her name.
I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah.
But I just want to, since this is potentially a public platform, it would be totally okay if she was keeping her name, and that was 100% her choice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna petition
honestly,
for a hyphen.
What's that?
I'm gonna petition for a hyphen. A dash.
Okay,
That's so
excellent.
funny.
I was just rejoicing in the fact that our like studio engineer is laughing. That's what brings joy to my
It does.
day.
It does.
Yeah.
She did start snickering back here, and I was like, with way to get that plug in there. Women empowerment all day long. And but in all seriousness, we're not even joking. I know Chase means that from the bottom of his heart. It's like the nicest dude ever.
Appreciate you.
But yeah, going back to that, like if you and your wife and your wife had different meanings of love, and you didn't have a shared meaning of what love is, then you guys would have different boundaries, right? You know what I mean?
I'm tracking everything you're saying.
Exactly. And that's one of those things where once you getting into a relationship and a deep relationship, which I've been in for a little bit over a year now. We celebrated our 1 year anniversary, August 5th.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, newlyweds. So I'm still fresh in the game. So
he's a veteran in my eyes.
Let's wait till I get to the questions. I do have some questions.
He said,
I know he's gonna ask
he said newlyweds. Got him there.
No, there's no get him or got him.
No get him or got him. I got you, brother. But no, I say this with all sincerity, is that it's definitely brought me closer to my relationship with God, and you know, and increased my faith, because not only did I get to understand truly what love is, you know, this is like into my 30s, like, you know, little context matters, right? Little context. As an athlete, high school, college, collegiate athlete, you know, went D1, had the opportunity, you know, to also play professionally. So it was one of those things where I was kind of always put into those environments where you didn't necessarily have to settle down, to say the least, right? So to make this choice and to be able to choose willingly, right, with free will, something that I felt was spiritual and divine. And that, you know, has kind of shaped a lot of my paradigm and like even my trajectory as well. Just
Big
believing
time.
that.
Yeah. So your wife and I, your wife.
Whoa!
Your
Is
wife
there something I
and
need to know?
have been married for 1 year. How long was the engagement?
We actually never got engaged.
Okay, nice. See,
Attaboy.
some different context.
It's some different context. We got it's a crazy story.
I'd love to hear about it, but we've only got about 58 more minutes.
Yep. Yeah.
And I know I have a long story for sure.
Yeah.
So, but I was going to ask, your parents, they married?
Yes.
Okay. Throughout your entire childhood?
Correct.
Young adulthood?
Yep.
Okay. What about your wife? Her parents married?
Yep. Correct.
Okay. So it's been my experience
Mm-hmm.
that if you've been around or experienced marriage, and you're not getting married to your sibling, then you have a different meaning of marriage. Would you agree with that?
The like between me and my wife?
Yeah.
No, we have a shared meaning of marriage.
So you guys have different parents,
Mhm.
correct?
Correct.
You witness their marriage contemporaneously, right? So around the same time period, but you know, you weren't under their roof.
Right.
She wasn't under your parents' roof, right?
Right.
So that means you experience marriage differently as kids.
Did we experience it differently, or
We
do we
did.
have a different meaning for it? Because experience is
Wait,
different.
we're getting the meaning.
Oh, okay.
Experience. We're talking about
I thought you
experience.
said, do you have the different meaning?
Yeah.
Can we
So
play
you-
that back? Did you say?
I did
Okay.
say meaning.
Meaning.
But
okay.
I'm unpacking
experience.
it,
Gotcha.
how I got to meaning.
Of course, we had a different
experience, right?
Right.
So now, when you come into marriage,
Mhm.
do you think that the meaning that you have for marriage is derived from the experience that you had for marriage?
Do I think that the meaning for marriage?
Your meaning.
I don't have my own meaning of marriage.
Wait. Okay.
Yeah.
So you grew
We
up.
have a shared meaning of marriage, where we get our values and meaning of marriage from this really great book called the Bible.
No, I understand that. I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
So my question is, did you have different experiences around marriage?
Different experiences around marriage. Yes.
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 And what I found as a person who's been married for 11 years,
Mm-hmm.
right, is that at points, the marriage that you experienced it still creeps into your current marriage. You can have shared values, but if you didn't have the shared experience or context,
Right.
there are things that you learned
For sure.
from that marriage that will manifest in your own.
Right. I completely agree. And I like that you use the word manifest because, I was actually just recently reading about this in Switch on Your Brain. And we are born not only with predispositions, but we pick up in these traits through experiences and through our family. However, what's really, really cool about our brains and our minds is that we still have the ability to choose. And that's what you call, and then rewire, right? And that's what you call neuroplasticity, which you're saying, hey, I can then reactivate this experience that I've had in the past, or I can choose to deactivate that and choose to have these shared values that we have within our own family and our own marriage and go that direction.
And in doing so, you are now creating your own experience of marriage.
Right.
Right?
Experience, but not meaning.
Now, when you talk to somebody else about your marriage, you are describing your experience and what it means to you, correct?
Well, what it means to me, that would be a different context than the meaning of marriage.
So we're just saying the meaning of your marriage, right?
Correct.
Right. Which is between you and your wife, correct?
Yes.
Right.
And God.
And God, yes, and God. Now, you bring that married experience that you derived,
right,
that you get to choose if you want to keep elements of it or discard elements.
Right.
Right? Now, if I'm a person who then observes your marriage, I can derive meaning from that. I can say, or observation, then I can come up with my own meaning and say, well, that's a marriage between a man and a woman and God. I want that because I like those attributes and characteristics. Or I don't want that because I do not like or agree with those attributes and characteristics. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree with that.
Right. So at that point, you have conveyed meaning, and it's up to you to clarify what your actual marriage means to that person or environment. Correct?
Yes and no. I wouldn't say it's my responsibility to change someone else's assumptions.
Well, if asked.
But if asked, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
correct.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I asked, you just cleared it up for me.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There we go.
Yes.
We're good.
So
we're on
that
the
is
same page.
the meaning you have behind your marriage.
Right.
Okay. So now you said what got you into this was love.
Right.
Right? So what I'm saying is if you grew up in a home and love was depicted one way,
Mm-hmm.
and then your spouse or significant other grew up in a home and love was depicted another way, you
Right.
come together, right? And you have to, at the very least, collaborate on what love means for you guys.
Correct.
And that can be with a third party, that can be with an institution, that can be with a philosophy, religion, whatever, right?
Yeah.
As a guide.
Right.
But you're still defining what that means, the agreements or the parameters of how you're going to function and operate.
Right.
Within the context that you are now newly framing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's all I'm.
Yeah. No, I'm riding with you on that.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Ladies
you
and
breaking
gentlemen,
that.
this exciting game of cat and mouse
It is.
put on by Josiah and Josh. I was going to cut them off at the 3:10 mark if they were still going, but it's all good. It's all good. No,
I'm just
I
making
lo-
sure I'm tracking everything you're saying.
I think
Yeah.
that this is a fantastic opportunity to witness two highly detail-oriented individuals find agreement on the details when neither is particularly willing to concede their point.
Well,
And
I completely understand what he's saying.
I know you do.
I went into
I know.
marriage that way, or and I was like, yeah, this is what we agreed to. This is kind of what we, and then like I said earlier, things can manifest, and it's like, wait, where did that come from?
Oh yeah.
Right? And it's like, this isn't the person I know, but it is their experience or their context.
Right.
And I had to learn more about that. Right?
Right.
It didn't really change how we operate, but I think, you've been in a relationship long enough to see different things, right? And to understand different things about your significant other.
That's true.
And when you get down into the context, that's where you realize, man, this is the origin of that.
I couldn't agree more. I'm going to do my best to tie a little bow on this.
Yes.
And then I want to move on.
Yes.
To something that this just happened. It just flowed to me. But I think you guys are going to like it. And we're going to have some fun and maybe learn some valuable things with our listeners as well. So my perception of the conversation that y'all just had was that it sounds like Josh, you and your lovely wife came to an agreement together.
Yeah. You
collaborated and decided what love means to you both and found stability. That's your foundation. And it feels energetically sacred. And I love that. I really appreciate that about both of y'all.
Yeah, it is.
And I also appreciate that I think the point that Josiah was making, well articulated, perhaps a bit painstaking, but but is that you are two individuals,
Right.
and therefore, as a direct result of that, you are incapable of having complete agreement with one another, because the scope of your experience, aka the context, it's just too different. And to have complete agreement, I'm going to wrap this up, I promise.
No.
To have complete agreement, it's too lofty a goal.
Right.
It's inconceivable. However, the principle that you're targeting it's beautiful, and it is absolutely transformative in the context of a relationship.
Correct.
So I just sat quietly over here and
I love it.
watched you guys.
I love
do
it.
But,
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready for the next topic?
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go.
Right or left?
Actually, we're going to go right. Always right. Right.
I'm an
and
always
right
left,
is always
guys.
right.
This is hilarious. Wait, what was that? Let's definitely remove whatever Josh just said. Let's cut that. I don't like it.
Let's keep it. Let's keep
like
it. Let's keep it.
Okay,
Well,
I'm
yeah, I was
outvoted.
just going to say really quickly, and, to piggyback off what you just said, I know you put the bow, but it's like, you know how there's like all this. Sometimes for me,
Put a
anyways,
little
I
glitter,
like
some
a little
sparkle on it. Yeah.
glitter, a little sparkle is like a marathon. The finish line is there, right?
Right.
It's not about how you run, right? Like I'm not gonna be paying attention. Like it's like horse blinders on. We're both headed towards that finish line. That's the goal, right? Like that's what I mean. As long as we have the shared meaning and shared version of like that's the finish line there, and we're heading there. Like that's all that matters, and things may change along the way. You may start walking instead of running, like whatever. That's the goal.
Shared destination, really.
Yep.
You're creating context for someone else.
Right.
Whoever's going to come along and witness that, the purpose
Right.
behind, your union or what you're doing.
Awesome. I love it.
So, for the turn and twist in our journey together today, I want to recall an experience that Josh and I had. Josh graciously brought me on a tour put on by New Friends, New Life, sponsored by some incredible organizations as well, where we were digging into the human sex trafficking space in Dallas.
Oh,
and, I looked over at Josh after we completed the tour, and I knew what he was feeling, like in his eyes. And then he validated. He's like, I think I'm going to cancel my meetings this afternoon. And I was like, I hear you, brother.
Yeah.
That was just, it's really hard to find words for it, but I can't stop that right now. But what I think we all can do as men who have the ability, we have a platform right now to influence. And so one of the most impactful learnings for me from that experience was the values around women in boyhood. So taking a conscious approach to the cultivation of the worthiness of women in our society, and how the long-term consequences of neglecting this aspect may result in and possibly have resulted in a complete devaluation of women in this space, where they're viewed as commodities. And so this is fascinating to me. I think this is actionable, and I'd like to understand from two men that I deeply admire, how do you think we can do a better job as leaders and just as human beings of cultivating worth and value and respect and admiration for women? And how can that start early? How can we exert our influence to make what we consider to be a positive or adaptive impact on our society? Is this interesting to you guys?
It is very interesting.
Okay.
Very I think it actually ties into
I thought so too.
some comments you made earlier, Josh, about the documentary and,
Thanks for
context.
rolling with it.
I love it. I would say that it ultimately comes down to, I think, having that shared meaning, to be completely honest, like having that shared meaning for what a woman is. And if you look at the Bible and what it says, you would understand they are God's creation as well. They came from Adam's rib. Women, that's biblically stating that's where women came from, and that they're also a part of a royal priesthood. Like, there's a lot of positive, empowering statements in the Bible about women, and I think that not only if we look at that in context and then look at what he said 2 greatest commandments is, which is to love God and then to love others. Mm-hmm. If you love others, and you first love God, I think it's really hard to commoditize anyone in that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Tracks.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say build on what Josh is saying. And I think for a lot of people, they've got to find a better standard of how they view women. Right. And I think also you got people that have to challenge their context around women. Right. What does that even mean? Like you said on the documentary, it could mean different things to different people, the concept of a woman.
Right.
And so for us to get to a shared value system of what a woman is worth to all of us, I think we first have to make sure we're looking at that, in our own lives. Like, what is that? What was my first experience with the women in my life? Mm-hmm. What was that like? How did that really frame how I see or view women? And I can say, just from personal experience in my family, it's been the women who have kind of taken on a lot of the burden to make sure that the households are good to go, right? That the kids have everything that they need. My grandmother was a single mom, and so that completely framed, I think, in my dad's mind, as a woman as being an equal partner, right? So he treated my mom that way, and my parents are also theologians, right? So they have a pretty heavy understanding of the Bible.
That is
in different texts, and how, So I agree. People have to find a better standard, right? And that could be the Bible for some people, depending on what culture they live in. It could be another text, spiritual text. And I think they also have to challenge, the context around what a woman is to them, or who a woman is to them, or the concept of a woman, to then see what the capability of a woman could be, right? And then that translates into how they treat women in their life currently. Is that track?
Yeah. I just think, like I said, just going back to science, and I do want to talk about quantum physics here. We'll circle back to that. But from a scientific standpoint, it's like a woman is a woman and a man is a man, right? Scientifically, genetically, right? Mm-hmm. Even from our DNA, like your
chromosomes.
Like it just makes who you are, being a man, that's like 90% of like your DNA, if not more, right? So it's very clear and cut and dry. And I think that like it shouldn't we shouldn't let other people just try to define these things. I just recently read about the awards, award shows maybe potentially canceling, male artist this, woman artist this, and it may be non-binary. And like, to me, that does women a disservice, right? Because if you take out, hey, this woman artist did this and it's just non-binary, like now we're just completely, wiping out the efforts and the hard work that has been done to essentially lift up these women, right? Because for so long, men have been the majority owners of these awards and recipients of these awards, and now women are finally getting in the spotlight, and now we're like, oh well, let's just non-binary everyone. It doesn't really matter, right? And I think when you get there, it's a pretty dangerous or slippery slope.
It may be an overcorrection or oversimplification.
Correct.
Okay, I get what you're saying. I think we also have to. We talk about commoditizing women, right? How not us, but how there's systems out there that do that. I think that's something that's kind of gone on for a long time, at least economically, right? So in least developed economies, which every single economy in the world is either a least developing economy or has been a least developing economy. And so when that is the case, then there's a commoditization of women because they're used to broker relationships and, power between families and tribes. Right? So we all know this. But I think what is understated is that typically the transition of, between least developed economy and emerging economy and advanced economy depends on the participation and labor impact that women have. So when women start to earn more money, then you have most of the labor force, if not all of it, actually becoming more producers or contributors to the economy. So I think whenever women are commoditized, it's actually doing the inverse. It's allowing the economy to stay stagnant. And I say that because we live in a monetary system. And so it is in our best interest to either sustain our levels of wealth, right, or grow them to advance women and their education, their health care, and their financial resources and stability, because it's only going to be good for the economy, right? So I think it's also about who we appeal to and how we appeal to them. And I think that will make some changes and sustain changes on how we treat women in our society.
I appreciate both of you took such a different perspective, at least from my vantage point. And my perspective is totally different also. I'm thinking, so let me backpedal here. I have 5 core values, personal core values in my life, and they are presence, understanding, acceptance, love, and transformation. And I think that the core value that resonates most deeply with me when it comes to the situation around trafficking is understanding. And I find that you may have heard the quote before, judgment is the end of understanding. And you might also be familiar with the concept that when we understand something at its most fundamental level, we cannot help but unlock some compassion for it. So, for example, if there's somebody that you really don't like, it's oftentimes because you don't understand that person.
Yeah.
And when we deepen our level of understanding of another being, we cultivate this compassion for them. And ultimately, I think that becomes acceptance, right? And that's kind of like the flow of the values, right? All of this work exists in a flow. So first you have to get present to stop being so distracted, and then you can begin the important work of understanding, and so on and so forth. I won't bore you guys with walking through my values flow unless you're really interested, but
We're interested.
I think, good, okay, maybe I will share then. Let's just hold the floor for the next 34 minutes. Okay, continue that train of thought. I think that we have failed miserably at understanding women. I think that this is a pervasive pattern in our society. And I won't claim to be any different. I think I fail to understand women often. And I think that being engaged to an incredible woman has been transformative for me in terms of I have someone that I am striving daily to understand at the deepest possible level, because the degree to which I can understand her enables me to love her more holistically, integrally, comprehensively. And that is my commitment to her. That's the destination that I've set, that I'm striving for every single day. And I'm not concerned about whether I reach it today, tomorrow, or never. Mm-hmm. It's the act of striving for that is meaningful to me. So how do we help our young men to better understand women? And this is begging the question, how do we cultivate the desire to understand women? And from a business perspective, what are the benefits of a deeper level of understanding when it comes to women? Because for many different reasons, there are many moving parts. This is a complex system, right? These variables are interacting with each other at rates that are beyond our level to comprehend. And this is happening consistently, day after day. But how do we highlight the importance of understanding women, and how might that have the power to change the world, but ultimately, specifically, human trafficking? And thank you guys for listening. I'm happy to explain the values later, but if y'all have thoughts on this, I would love to.
No, you touched on it beautifully. And hopefully our listeners can see the pattern of what, we're talking about here. Because as it relates to what you said, smart. That's the destination, right? Like that's the marathon that I was referring to. And then the striving towards it, right? You may sometimes are running there. You may have to walk sometimes. You may
get turned around.
You may get turned around. And you're like, hey, oh no, I got to go this way, right? And it's a marathon. It's a journey. And I think that's, going back to, my faith, I think it's very important to understand oneself first, right? And then you can then learn to understand others, right? And I think that, God gives us that ability and desire to want to understand these things, right? Like, I was, from where I grew up, it was, I shouldn't be where I am today, but I believe God gave me that desire to essentially not only overcome the challenges that I was facing, but to then get to a place where I can have enough awareness of like, all right, well, now I want to learn and love someone else. And then doing that, that's what brought me closer to God. So I'm saying all that, and I may be talking in circles, but what I'm trying to say to answer your question directly is that you have to, know God first, love yourself, and then you're able to love others. And there's no other way around it, in my opinion. If you really want to truly understand women, right? I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect and I understand women completely, because like that's an equation that I don't think anyone can solve. Just like the same equation that I don't think women can understand men, right? Like these are things that people have been trying to figure out for years. Same thing with God, right? Like, so that's what helped me understand. I'm like, okay, well, if this is this person who, is trying their best to understand me and I'm trying my best to understand them, me speaking about my wife, and they're still able to find a way to give me grace, right? And then I'm like, oh, well, they're giving me grace. Like, I don't know. You don't actually see it. They don't actually hand you something, right? But you just have faith that, you have faith that, okay, they are giving me grace. I'm going to go home. I have faith that my wife did not have divorce papers on the table and that, like, she didn't do something heinous. Like, that's faith, right? You can't actually feel it or see it. So understanding, I think, is found through grace and faith, and you can't have understanding without those things. So without, being able to give someone grace, you wouldn't even understand why someone is on OnlyFans, right? Like, shaming someone isn't going to help you get closer to understanding them, right?
For sure.
Right. So you're going to have to try to dig deep to understand why they may do the things that they do, or, how they ended up in those situations. So I do think that it just starts with grace, having grace, being able to ultimately tap into that grace. And like I said, you can't tap into grace without understanding how flawed you are as a person first, right? And that's what I mean by understanding yourself. I can just sit here and replay all of the things that I've done of oh God, let's turn that off. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to feel that or see that. So instead, I'm just going to talk about other people. And that's the problem that most people have, right? Yeah. When you feel your own shame, you blame. It's pretty easy to remember. Shame equals blame. So you're going to blame others, and you're not going to look to understand. So it starts with understanding yourself, knowing who God is, and then you're able to love and show other people grace.
Josiah, do you think that Josh's perception of grace and my perception of understanding, of acceptance, I think I see a lot in common. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think they're very similar. I think understanding is, at least for me, a very simplistic definition starts with understanding self and stops just short of judgment, right? So you can assess all day. You could look at a person, look at a situation. You can try to understand the application of that particular situation in your life. But the moment you judge, I do, to your point, it's kind of it's unfortunate for you, or myself. If I judge another person, it's unfortunate for me, because what I've done is I've effectively tried to stop time. Because I don't know what that person is going to go on to do.
Right.
And I've effectively said, I'm not going to change in any way.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I'm not going to grow in any way. So let me assess this person and judge them based on where I believe I'm at, and judge them based on who I think they can become. And I think that's just one of the worst things we could possibly do. That's my judgment.
Right.
It's one of the worst things that I've done.
Right. And that's not acceptance or understanding or grace.
Right. Neither you can't understand.
Right.
Yeah.
You kind of already robbed yourself of that.
I think unpacking our judgments helps us understand, ourselves and then possibly others.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I was hoping that we would have time to get into this. You guys might be looking at me because you want to hear more about my values.
I'm sorry. I want to answer your question about.
Yeah, I was.
Was it you said in business, how can women help? What was the?
Oh no, my reference to business was just in terms of, if you want someone to buy a product,
right,
they need to understand how it's going to impact them.
Okay.
Right, gotcha. And so when I think about, sometimes we get pretty philosophical, and it's time to roll that into the practical and understand this idea is powerful, yet its power is diminished if we don't have the means to roll it out for real people. So I can talk all day about understanding women, but for people to engage in the work of understanding women, they need to understand what they stand to gain from doing so. And that was my reference to business.
So I could just say, in business, what we stand to gain is something that's called collective intelligence, right? So you probably have heard of this. It's a big, psychological term, but really, when you're in a group or on a team, when there are more women involved, there's a lot more collective intelligence, and the team ultimately, they achieve their goals faster or better, more effectively. That's been proven. There's a lot of work on that. And they say the reason that is the case is because women are better at picking up on the nonverbal cues that then help move things along in terms of the project or whatever it is. So
it's interesting.
Yeah, that's just one. I was thinking about that, and I knew that. I remember that term, but that is definitely something to that I think we could all benefit from in terms of business sense. Just hire more women, Mr. Recruiter.
But yeah, I will say, I want to add back to your question about women. I think as men, we are here and put on this earth to love women. And, you know, I've already stated how to love, right? It's like that grace, understanding. So now that we understand the situation with human trafficking, I think that it's even more of a passion of mine to essentially create solutions to essentially dismantle human trafficking, because I love my wife, I love, you know, and I love God, and I love, you know, humans in general, people. So let's figure out how to, you know, pretty much put an end to monetizing off of women in that way. I think there's more effective ways, like you said, they could be in the workplace contributing to projects.
Yeah, I mean, it
has more fulfillment. You know what I mean?
Trafficking, you know, people in general is
Right.
less productive for the whatever economy that's going, you know, on in, than actually employing them and allowing them to produce within that and create within that economy.
Right.
Right. But the world, at least where human trafficking is a thing and it works effectively, unfortunately, doesn't really understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's part of my soul curriculum.
So yeah, you're here to help help us understand that.
Yeah.
I like to, when I talk with candidates, think about it in terms of, so oftentimes I'm working with people who are not happy with their work, right? And they don't understand why. But what tends to be common is that they're yearning for their dream job. And I like to remind them that their dream job is also yearning for them. And when they settle, when they end up doing something that is not their life's work, there's an opportunity cost there that we don't think about.
Right.
When you take a job because you think you have to, or, you know, circumstances conspire to put you in this position, or that's how you think of it, you're a puzzle piece to a puzzle out there. And that's a philosophy, you know, that is not a fact. But anyways, okay, just to make sure that we have time for this last question, and we're ready to move on to the last question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. So in moments of profound joy or deep suffering, how do you communicate with your soul to learn the underlying lesson? And I'll dance around this question before I ask you guys to answer. But I have found that profound experiences, good and bad, are signals of something that I need to learn. And so this is kind of like that signal to noise ratio. The pain is there. I know that there's a valuable takeaway from this experience, and it's coming in the form of a lesson. However, I have to become still enough to hear what my soul is trying to tell me. And that can be a challenging thing to do in a very distracted life, in a very distracted workplace, and a very distracted society. So I'm curious how you both have learned to communicate with your soul during some really painful or challenging experiences, or during times of profound joy. Don't forget about that one too.
I'll let you go first.
You sure?
Yeah.
Dang.
100%.
Wow. Okay. Well, it's first acknowledging that for me, and like I said, I understand our perspectives are different, which I'm so glad, because I'm usually around people who have similar perspectives, or I've done podcasts where we have the similar. So now this is one where I'm like, I've had to do what you do. I'm like, ooh, this is getting a little spicy. Like,
sit up.
I got to sit up. I got to go take my shirt and do this a little bit. I'm like, ooh, I like this. But for me, I think that we are co-creators with our souls, which essentially, or co-creators with God. Our souls are co-creators with God. And what I mean by that is, I'm gonna try to wrap this up, but I wrote this down. So, like, first off, the whole concept of soul curriculum, I really enjoyed, and I think it's really deep. It's very interesting. But I wrote this, the idea of soul curriculum is that it isn't just a series of random events. It's a purposeful journey with lessons meant to shape us spiritually and emotionally. So I took the time, which didn't really take long, right, to look up the definition of curriculum, right? So this is subjects that comprise of a course of study in school or college, right? But what's cool about the Latin word, and I know you like prefixes, curricle is the Latin word, which means a light, open, two-wheeled carriage pulled by two horses side by side. I thought that was so dope because of that belief that I already have, that you're paired up with something, right? Whether you believe in God or not, you believe that these things were inherently there.
Oh, yeah.
Inherently being that it was already there. So you're paired up, and that's like I said, that's the Latin meaning of it. So diving into, like I said, I wanted to get into quantum physics because I think that's just so fascinating, right? And like how science and, my beliefs, or AKA the Bible, where I take most of my beliefs, have. So essentially, just in essence, quantum physics suggests our consciousness affects the behavior in subatomic particles. Particles move back and forward in time and can exist in multiple places at once, and that the universe is interconnected in ways that allow faster than light communication. And that was just something we were just talking about with the group, right? That's why you learn better in groups. With that being said, if you make decisions right now that, we all seen butterfly effect or understand that. You can make a decision right now and then it affects something 3 hours from now or 3 months from now or 3 years from now. And understanding that free will allows you to do that, then you're now able to tap into that higher level of consciousness where you're able to pinpoint those signals that you mentioned, right? And I think the one that's giving you those signals is the one that you're partnered with, who your soul is partnered with, which for me is the Holy Spirit. And I allow, I let that order my steps and guide my steps, or at least that's what I intend to do, and that's my intention. And with that belief, it just takes you so much further because you realize that, one, it's bigger than yourself. And, not only science will tell you this, but people who have reached great things, they will tell you that, hey, it was because I believed in something bigger than myself. From Steve Jobs all the way to someone I just mentioned earlier, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, everyone, you name it, Michael Jordan, Phil Knight, you name it. It's something bigger than just myself, right? So with that belief, it just takes you so much further, and then you're able to kind of identify and observe, what it is that it's teaching you. And there is even from an observer effect, from a quantum theory standpoint, where the act of observing influences the outcome. We believe that it resonates the idea that our choices, guided by our faith, have real consequences in the world. So every decision we make can either align us more closely with God's purpose, which would be our soul curriculum, or lead us away from it.
I resonate.
Yeah, that tracks. I don't even know if I need to.
I'm pretty certain you have a slightly different perspective. Maybe, what's so funny? Huh? Yeah, I know. Certainty, folks, so it's an illusion. No. We can have clarity. Clarity's a good goal. Mm-hmm. But certainty, I don't know that it actually exists in this life. Not in my experience. But what's funny is that it seems like we all have our own language here, but we're describing really similar concepts. And I draw attention to that because I think we live in such a polarized world that identifies right and wrong and sees no area in between. And to me, that just feels so silly.
It does.
Right.
What are we doing? The hubris to say that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah. So can you just read the question to me one more time?
Yeah. Because Josh droned on too long?
No. I want to make sure. I want to make sure I'm not taking some of his answer and forming my own. So I would just want to wipe my slate because his was so good.
Palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Okay, Here we go. In moments of profound joy or deep suffering, how do you communicate with your soul to learn the underlying lesson?
Well, the way I look at it is, it's not really about the result. Like, so profound joy and what was it, suffering?
Deep suffering.
Deep suffering.
Ouch.
To me, my soul sees them as the same. And what I try to do is respond in the same manner to either one. And the way I'm able to do that is I'm able to reference that joy or plight on a continuum of time relative to myself, right? So like 5 years ago, the most joyful thing, what was it? I asked myself that. And then I look at the most joyful thing that I'm going through right now in that moment. And I try to see if there's a difference between the two. And there may be a difference in the actual manifestation, but not the actual joy itself. Does that track so far? Right? Yeah. And then I try to take it a step further, get a little bit more three-dimensional. And I try to think about descriptions of joy that other people have told me about, right, across their continuum. And then I say, okay, what was that like for them based on their description? How did they respond based on that description? And then I realize, well, it's not that different. Like, I can see, I have empathy to see, like, oh, they did this and they did that, right? And then same thing with pain, right, or suffering. I try not to make too much of a big deal out of it because there's been someone, was nothing new under the sun. Mm-hmm. There's been someone who has gone through a similar experience or has the same plight or had it over their timeline, right? So what I try to do is really collapse time, realize or reference my own plight or joy on that continuum, and then try to get the best application in terms of the future. Like, how can I actually apply the lessons for myself or others across their time to make the best decisions that I can possibly make? And I do the most important thing that I think anyone can do, which is document it. Turn it into perspective that can be shared. That perspective then becomes new context. That context then now becomes new values. Those values then influence decisions, right? And hopefully we all aren't just doing that with one thing, but we're looking across multiple things to formulate those opinions, assumptions, and then ultimately decisions, behaviors, and character. So that's kind of how I...
Stay tuned for Josiah's book launch. This will happen at some point.
It will happen.
And I just want to give a little credit. This is why we say that Josiah has eagle vision, because he's better than anyone I know at rising above the clutter of thought and seeing the situation for what it is. And I think, especially as an emotionally centered person, I value that so much in my life. That has really bolstered my ability to see comprehensively, because I think that I have no problem with my ability of sight. I relish it, and I think I've had deep level insight into topics, and I'm so incredibly grateful that I've been privy to those. However, there's a flip side to that, and Josiah brings a lot of perspective for me from that angle.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially considering what's happening currently in my life, and you're aware of this.
I am.
I try to be consistent in how I respond, to what's actually happening in my environment. It's a stillness, right? And I rarely like to talk about it, but
yeah. But I like to pull it out
Yeah, I mean, I painfully sometimes.
Sometimes. But hey,
Yeah,
the soul always knows what to do to heal itself.
it does.
The challenge is to silence the mind. And I think through the years that we spent together now, it has been a process of teaching myself to silence my mind, listen to my soul instead. And that's incredibly valuable. I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but to me, that's the window to the divine. Like Josh was talking about, the Holy Spirit, having that dual chariot that's being led forward. I think that, I won't claim to fully understand it, but I think that we have receivers internally. And the degree to which we have decided to be receptive, we can benefit from that insight and that understanding. So
yeah, 100%. And you can tap into, like, how are we able to understand him is because we're literally tapping into his mind.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah,
Literally.
Yeah. I mean, we're
Quite literally.
I hear you.
Yeah.
It's a mesh network.
It's a mesh network, right?
Shout out to Westworld.
Right.
Not getting credit on that. We don't have enough money to pay you.
We don't.
I didn't stop at the first season, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
I should have kept going.
Yeah.
Dang. All right.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right. So I would like to thank Josh Hunt for being our guest today.
Yeah.
This
Thank
has
you,
been
Josh.
a really learningful experience.
This is so dope. You guys are some dope individuals. I've already know you, but Josiah, this has been great to be able to speak to another brother that has his thoughts well thought out. And I mean that in a sincere way. Like, your thoughts are well thought out, and want to challenge anyone out there to continue to keep thinking, because, like I said, that's one of the best gifts that we have, and that's what kind of separates us, and essentially why we're the apex predators, because we can actually think and make decisions. So yeah, such a pleasure to do this with you guys.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you for being on, for sure.
I'd like to close us out with a Gary Zukov quote. I think it's only appropriate. And that quote is this: "Every experience, no matter how difficult, has within it a gift. The gift is a lesson about your soul's curriculum." Thanks for listening.
Sheesh.
Good job. The Enzo Podcast is brought to you by Bolton Capital and Noon Holdings. You can find the Enzo Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music. The song Full Bloom by Yule and Noemina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.